Hey everybody, and welcome to our webinar on building great product roadmaps, the missing link. My name's Craig Smith. I'm the head of organizational product at SoftEd and Skills Development Group. Thanks for your time today. So the first question you might be asking is, why roadmaps? Well, I'm Craig and I'm passionate about roadmaps, and that's because when these things are done well, they're one of the keys to great agile product delivery. You see, we all know what a roadmap is. It could be something you're using like this when you're going on a road trip. It could be something you're very used to when you're designing a project. But the thing is that our traditional roadmaps are not what we're talking about here. And so today I want to look into see what do we mean by great agile product roadmaps. The thing is that whatever it is that we're doing, whether it be going on a road trip or delivering a piece of work, we need to plan our destination. And so in the case on screen here, I'm based in Brisbane. If I wanted to go to Sydney, I've got a bunch of different options. I mean, there's a couple of the fastest car driving options there, about 9.5 hours. There's actually further routes. I could go out, through the middle of Australia if I wanted to. Takes a little bit longer. Of course, I can jump on a plane. In fact, I could even hop on a boat if I wanted to. They're all ways that I could get to my destination. Now, the thing is that GPSs or Google Maps like this are really good because, as you can see along the route, there's things like roadworks. And so what this does is allows us to reroute. Now, I might have had a plan, for example, that somewhere near that roadworks, maybe I wanted to stop at a town like Grafton and have some meal or fuel up with fuel. But if the road was blocked or something changed, my destination is I need to get to Sydney. And so with a roadmap, you can reroute around the problem. Right? So you have to look at what is the thing that you're aiming for. In this case, my aim is to get to Sydney. I might need to change my plans, right? I might need to get there faster, which means instead of the road trip I planned, I get on a plane. Or maybe I need to visit an island on the way, which means that the boat is my option. Whatever it is what is the destination, right? We all have options. We reroute around the things that get in our way. The destination is the key. And it's as Earl Nightingale says, all you need is the plan, the roadmap, and the courage to press on to your destination. Well, we're all familiar with roadmaps, I'm sure. There are some issues with traditional roadmaps, the things that perhaps you're most common with. Sometimes people tell me that roadmaps aren't exactly agile. The problem is that our traditional roadmaps aren't very agile. So let's play a little bit of a game of hands up. Have you seen any of these? And the first one is the roadmap that has all the things. Of course, we all have to-do lists. We've all got lots of things to do. But the problem is if there's too much work in progress, that can be a problem. So we want to avoid those roadmaps that have all the things. It's not about how much information you can cram on a page. I see roadmaps that are too long. In this case, this roadmap goes out past 2050. That's 30 plus years. Whilst this is a little bit of an exaggeration, how can you know what's happening in there? Right? You need a final level of detail. And the other problem with this is that the names are so vague. Even if you're working on this, I'm not sure you would know what perhaps CMB S4 was, or Ice Cube Gen 2 sounds really good, but what do we mean by that project? So, too long. Make them short. Of course, the flip side is that some roadmaps are just too empty. Sometimes we don't know where we're going yet. We still know the destination, but the idea is that you fill the roadmap out as you go, and we'll see some examples of that a little later. But sometimes I see people who just think that their agile project is we'll make it up as we go along. We have to have some idea about what that destination is and some idea about what we might be doing inside the phases, whatever 1, 2, and 3 is, whether that's weeks or months. We probably, particularly the closer to now we are, we need to have more information. So agile is not just about making it up as we go. So we need roadmaps at least with some guidance, even though we might continue to fill them out a little as we start. This is one of the most common ones I see, and it's where the roadmap is just way too busy. Too much stuff, trying to cram too much information onto one page, perhaps in this case, a very Gantt chartish where we're assigning things to different people. Even though people crave information, the idea about a roadmap is it's a communication mechanism, not about how much information you can cram on one place. So make them simpler, make them easier to read, and stay away from the traditional things like Gantt charts, because things like understanding what a person's doing. You can see here, for example, that Joe, he's working on lots and lots of things at one time, but even are those things actually true? Plus, it also falls into the space of things that are too long. So too much information, too busy, sometimes also has some of the aspects of the others as well. And then, of course, what we see is the two waterfall type roadmap. That's where it has something like, here's some analysis we're going to do, here's the work we're going to do, here's how we're going to verify it, here's how we roll it out. And, that's not to the iterative and incremental form that, we expect in agility. So I see this a lot, particularly when we teach roadmaps, that this is the default that people fall into because it feels safe and it's the way that we've traditionally delivered projects. But as I said, moving to more an incremental way, how can we do something small and deliver it? How can we do something again and deliver it? That's what you're looking for in a roadmap. Short, sharp outcomes. And we'll talk a little more about that a little later. And then, of course, we fall into the trap that thinking just the tools will solve it for us, right? Now, I've picked on a particular tool here, but it doesn't matter which tool it is. Look, I remember a world when it was PJ Agile, what I call pre-Jira Agile. But the reality is that whilst tools are great, the best roadmaps are those that are done very simply, right? On a piece of paper and a pen, perhaps in a very simple tool or table or something like that. Something very simple you can start with. And then once you've got that understood, if you can then put it into your tool and get value out of it, and it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to do that, then move forward with it. But I find a lot of the tools just complicate the roadmaps, and as a result, they don't really get updated or they're too hard to update. What you want is a tool that's very, very easy to update. So the tools sometimes just don't solve it, they make it harder. And then the last thing is just watching out for what we call the train wreck. That's where everything lands in exactly the same place, the last quarter of the project. I was working on an initiative a couple of years ago with a team, and they had exactly that, a 2-year program of work. Everything was landing in the last quarter, and their history told them that they weren't going to meet the date. So they had this stuff planned out for 2 years. You could essentially say it was going to be 3 years because when they got there, they wouldn't have been ready. The whole idea of iterative and incremental is so that we can reduce the risk, so we can see value earlier. So how can you break things down better and see progression as opposed to just one big train wreck at the end? Right? We're just falling into the same old problems that we had before. All right. So, in order to set the scene, let's do a complete history of agile software development. Okay, I'm just kidding. Some of you are about to log off. I'm not gonna do that. But let's just very quickly just stop and take a look and go, really where did a lot of this problem come from? And the problem comes from in the simplicity of things like Scrum. Nothing wrong with Scrum, right? Say the trouble with Scrum, but nothing wrong with it. The issue is that it starts with this thing called the product backlog, but it doesn't give you any indication at all as to how stuff got into the product backlog. And again, if you've done Agile Fundamentals training or Certified Scrum Master or something like that, you probably know that because people have added additional things to those frameworks in order to tell you how to do it. But there's not really a common agreement or approach to how we actually populate this. So whilst this is really good for explaining how we do the work, it doesn't really explain the discovery. Now, the interesting thing is we can go and look at the Agile Manifesto, and a thing that I often ask people in my courses is we do an exercise to understand which parts of the manifesto are related to product management and roadmaps. And the answer is this. Right? What ends up happening in the class is that people end up highlighting the entire thing because if you really read through this, all of this has to do with product management. And in fact, if you look at all these, you can actually answer a lot of these questions or move along the way in doing a roadmap. And so really the crux of all this is that if we think about the manifesto, it talks about responding to change over following a plan. This is our plan, but it's an adaptable plan. It's a plan that can change. And so what we're really looking for is a unicorn that allows us to break down work as well as plan and deliver incrementally. And that's what we're talking about today. So one of the techniques that we use across all of our courses at SoftEd is something called the value life cycle. And the value life cycle is broken into these 3 spinning circles. There's a 4th half circle there. And the analogy that I often talk about when teaching this is the concept, and you can kind of see it in the background there, is the concept of spinning plates. You might have all seen the Magician's Act where they spin plates on top of a stick, like in the background. And the idea is that the magician starts spinning the plates, gets down to the end, right? The other ones start wobbling. And that's what often happens when you're a product manager, a project manager, a scrum master, is that your job is to continually check in on those spinning plates. And the reality is that life is like that, is that we just don't set it and move down the line and everything just stays stable. The thing is that we have to keep an eye on all the things. And it's the same thing when we're working through in an agile life cycle, is we don't do it in a waterfall way. We don't do all the discovery, then all the delivery, then all the operate. We start and we spin the discovery wheel. We start to figure out what it is that we're trying to do. What is the problem? Then how we might do it through a very basic plan, but we want to get just enough so we can then get the people, whoever it is delivering, spinning their wheel. And of course, they start spinning their wheel. And as they do a little bit, they get to a point where they might have an MVP or something that can get to a customer, which then can send it out into the customer world. But all the same time, we're continuing to discover, because we're continuing to feed this deliver. Deliver is obviously running in its iterative process, and through DevOps and things like that, we're getting into the operate cycle. But the problem over here in operate is it's not just the thing that we're building. It's also all the other everyday operations, which is a little green, little grey circle in the middle there. That is constantly spinning. And of course, these people come up with, hey, here's something that doesn't work. It might be a bug or a defect. It comes back into delivery. They find a new idea. It spins back into discovery. Of course, new ideas keep coming through this entry point, which is the portfolio. So stuff keeps coming in there as well. We're keeping all these things up in the air. And so the question is, how do you keep track of all that, and how do you know which ones you've got the capacity to do and not have the capacity to do? And again, that's another reason why we might use the value lifecycle and why we use roadmaps. So I mentioned this before, right? When we start off, we always start with why. You may have heard the Henry Ford quote that's famously often used in this sort of context, that if Henry Ford had asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. It's because we as humans are very good at thinking about the thing that we want and describing how we want it to work, rather than what the problem is we want to solve in the first place. And particularly with end users, because they know the product that they've had before, they'll just ask for a shinier version of the one before. So, of course, right, if you didn't know any better, if you were being asked, what you wanted, of course you'd say a faster horse, which may be possible to do. But Henry Ford had other ideas. He'd come up with a motor car. Now, that invention, right, was not a faster horse, but it was actually what was the problem in the first place. And the problem in the first place was, I need to be able to get from A to B reliably. So we have to train ourselves to ask our customers, ask our end users, what is the problem, which then allows us to be innovative in the solution that we're trying to get to. So starting with why is a super important aspect. And then why is that important? Well, it allows us to come up with our vision. Our vision tells us exactly what it is that we're trying to deliver. Once we have the vision, we can then move down to product strategy, where we might use tools like a Lean Initiative Canvas. A Lean Initiative Canvas then allows us, once we understand the problem, to then start mapping out a product roadmap. Once we get down to delivery, that product roadmap is what we can then start to break down and turn into the product backlog, which is filled with things like user stories, and we might use a user story map to help us visualize that, but to break those things down. So we are moving down the chain, and as you can see there, the roadmap is really the thing that sits between the vision and the delivery, and that's the missing link. We're often very good at understanding the problem, but then we jump straight into the product backlog. So I mentioned the Lean Initiative Canvas. This is just what it looks like. Really your way of articulating the why. It's got a little bit of room for scope there, but we're not at that point yet. We're just trying to understand the problem. And of course, if you don't want to use the one that we use, you may be familiar with these other canvases: opportunity canvases, lean canvases, business model canvases, even impact maps. All of these are ways that we can investigate an idea. So start with the idea is important. The other important thing is that when we talk about responding to change following a plan, we need an adaptive portfolio, or a lean portfolio, as a lot of people now talk about it. Now we have whole courses on lean portfolio management, but the problem we have is that we have lots of ideas, whether they be existing things that we've dreamt up, whether they be new ideas that have come from within the organization or our stakeholders. We have existing roadmaps or even our current roadmaps that tell us what we want to do. And we also have strategic items, plus just other things like legislative requirements and all this kind of stuff. And they all come through this little product funnel here. Problem is when they pump out, we don't want to run into that mess that we talked about before. We have this really big stuff. And so the key thing that we want to do at a portfolio level is make sure that we take big initiatives and break them down. In the same way that we take features at a team level and break them into stories, we need to repeat the same thing up at the portfolio level. And so the example here is, let's just say that we had this big year-long initiative. So if each of these lines is measured in a quarter, because that's typically a good length, a good maximum length, to deliver something. Of course, you want to deliver things sooner, but don't go any longer than about 3 months without delivering stuff. So what we might do is break that down into initiative 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're still the same big project, but some aim we can get to here, some aim we can get to here. Now, why is this important? Well, one of the things that might happen is we also have this small initiative, maybe it's some regulation or something, initiative 5, that needs to be done in the same time frame as initiative 2. Well, if we can visualize that, we can then start to make some decisions, because if we need the same people working on these two things, we're not going to be able to do them necessarily at the same time. So what do we do, right? Do we push this back? Well, that might push then the whole initiative back by 3 months. Do we want to do that? Do we perhaps find a different way of doing this piece of work here? Do we, is this small enough that maybe we can do a little bit of it, but it allows us to have the right conversations. So this has to start at portfolio level in understanding that even though we might have something that is a bigger piece of work, we need to break it down. And this really comes in line with, a movement that's been happening for, a number of years now about this movement from project to product. Projects were very much time limited. We come up with some features, the project team would deliver, they would disband. Then we'd put it together a new project team, do some more features, then they'd disband, and then the same thing would happen. And the problem is, just as the team was getting good, they would disband away. So the product approach is, let's just keep teams together that are working in a like area of the organization or a like type of product, and they just keep releasing the product as they need to, but in between they'll do things like BAU or innovation or support or other things that help that thing come together instead of disbanding things. Now, these things may still be funded as projects. If you're an organization where you still haven't got quite rid of projects, you can still do that, but the idea is bringing a product team together that stays together around the product rather than temporary endeavors. All right, so how can we just jump straight into the product backlog? And the answer is yes and no. Let's dig into that. The first question, though, is asking the question, why do we roadmap? Why do we do this in the first place? Using my logic from before, I always start with why. And so why do we roadmap? Well, it helps us visualize the strategy and the vision. Right? People like to be able to see that, and seeing it on a page can be very useful. So it's that visualization. It's also our communication mechanism. It helps us communicate timelines, because as much as we would all like to say, hey, it's not important, let's just roll along, people do have to have an understanding of cost and time and capacity and all those kinds of things. So it allows us to communicate timelines, but also make sure that we can manage the expectations. And as I said before, the real key to this is it gives you an alignment between the team and the stakeholders. So what makes up a roadmap? Well, if we break it down, the primary parts of a roadmap is it essentially starts with our vision, whether that's written on the roadmap or written as part of that canvas that we showed you before, but our vision is the guide. It should be written in an objective way, right? And if we have objectives, we can then measure progress. Have we done this or have we not done it? We can break it into themes that allow us to focus on outcomes. We'll show you some themes in just a moment. It can show timeframes, but those timeframes are broad, right? They will say things like it will deliver in this month or this quarter, right? So we're not getting down to the nitty gritty because we're building in some slack or some flexibility, but also, we just don't know that level of detail at this point. And they are subject to change. They change all the time. They can also show you things like features. They can start to show confidence level, development stages, if that's important. If you've got multiple customers, you can display that. You can show different product areas as well. There's lots of things you can do. There's no right or wrong way in order to show a roadmap. So I mentioned themes and streams. These might be some of the different themes or streams, and we call them this just because whatever name sort of works for you, but so streams are more, maybe there's a stream of work or a product team or something like that, whereas themes can be more related to the way the organization is structured, or different subcomponents of a product that you're doing. And so we might have themes or streams that are around, say, what the marketing team needs to do, or what IT or the technology teams need to do, or what our different customer priorities might be, or maybe there's some large customers, some small customers. What are some of our architectural constraints, which can be technical, but could be other constraints that we have inside the organization. It could be themed out by different components of the product, by different employee constraints. So maybe you have in-house people and vendors, or maybe there is some certain expertise that you want to be able to call out in the roadmap, or it could be through different government constraints, legislation. Those kind of things may also be an impact. Okay, so all that's well and good. Question, hopefully, that you're asking is, what might one look like? And so here's an example. And I've got a friend. I've got to thank my friend Michael, who is on the call, who came up with this example about a taco store for me many years ago. There is a story behind the taco. If you're interested in that, I can tell you that later. But anyway, let's imagine that we're coming with a vision for a taco store. And so this one has our vision on the top, right? It's authentic tacos made to perfection. We've got some time frames, so you can see what we're going to do in quarter 3 and quarter 4, what we plan to do next year in 2025 and maybe into the future. And so we've got some themes here, right? Our theme for quarter 3 is to get authentic restaurant quality tacos with, you can see the objectives there, increasing sales, decreasing broken taco shells, reducing the number of unsatisfied customers. In quarter 4, we're going to focus on a new product called Super Mega Size Tacos. And again, we've got some things that we want to do there. Next year, you can see it starts to get a little more vague into the future. We're going to maybe do some taco bowls and some flavored taco shells, maybe some taco kits. And then further into the future, maybe people can take stuff home, or we don't have to bake them, that stuff like that. And you can see here there's a disclaimer down the bottom. This thing is constantly changing. Right? How it looks today, it might look different tomorrow as we have different conversations. So that's an example of a roadmap. Here are some different ones. Sometimes, the quarters don't necessarily work for you. Maybe if you work in releases. Now, again, you don't want these to be any longer than, a month to a couple of months, right? Again, 3 months at a maximum. But, if you got release 1, 1.1, and 1.2, and that's the way you plan, and they've got sort of, dates, you could use that as your planning mechanism. I've very effectively used just monthly roadmaps, for a long time. I used to do, in fact, the products that we have at SoftEd here in a monthly roadmap, and it used to work really well. We've gone back to quarterly. I kind of miss monthly because it was a lot more prescriptive. And then we have a timeline, and you can see here that you don't always have to have things in the same length. We've got version 1, which is 3 months, and version 1.2, that's 2 months. And you can show it on a timeline like that. So it not only shows you the version of the release, but the date as well. So there's different ways of being able to demonstrate that. So if you're looking for templates, if you're looking on the internet, this is the one that you're most likely to come across. Roman Pichler is kind of one of the best known people in the product space, written a bunch of books. I'll talk about those a little later, but this is his Go product roadmap. His idea behind this is that he really wants you to start with goals, not with fixed dates. And so the date's there, but it's kind of, it's a little open to interpretation about how you display that date. I've tried to use this, and I'm not a huge fan of it, but I know some people I work with really love it. So it depends on your mileage. If you visit his website, you'll be able to get some instruction on that. It's also talked about in these books. But what I found was this wasn't quite working for me. So at SoftEd, we came up with this, which is the SoftEd rolling roadmap. And very much like the example I showed you before, essentially it's just a bunch of boxes. And the idea of being a rolling roadmap is that the roadmap is always moving to the left. So in other words, if you see here, we've got the current quarter. It's broken into months here. Here's the current quarter. So at the moment, we're just at the end of June. So if this was quarter 2 for the year, if we call this quarter 2, that would be April, May, and June. So once we get to the end of June, this will then disappear to the left. Quarter 2, which will then be July, August, September, would roll to the left here and be here. And then quarter 3 essentially moves up, quarter 4 moves up, and the roadmap continually moves to the left. Now, if you're using a tool, using something like Miro, which I've used for roadmaps for quite a while, you can just essentially keep moving things, by showing the view in a different space, right? You don't have to keep moving things around. But as a starting point, I find this is a very useful way of displaying it. The other thing you'll notice is the coloring. The coloring gets lighter as you move to the end. That's because it gets more vague, right? We know a lot about the current month, or we should do because we're already working on it. we're getting pretty confident on the next quarter because we've been starting to plan for it, ahead of, maybe quarterly planning or PI planning, whatever you do. But as you start to move further out, those ideas get more and more vague. We saw the same thing on the taco store. So that kind of begs the question then, if you're building a roadmap, how often do you update it? And so the problem with those traditional roadmaps I talked about before is I see lots of people do roadmaps, but they get put into a PowerPoint deck and they stay there for 1.5 years, right? Very rarely get updated. The idea behind this is that you want something that is updated on a very regular basis, but depending on the type of initiative or product that you're building will probably depend on how often you do update it. Because if you've got a very new product or you're in a very dynamic market or lots of things are changing, you could be updating this thing every day, maybe through to every month. Right. And that kind of maps what you saw on the roadmap 4, where it was monthly, particularly if you're kind of in any kind of agile environment where this product is constantly being updated. Now, you might look at it and go, why would you be updating that daily? The reality is that, I would carry around the rolling roadmap in my notebook when, particularly when I was in the office more. And I would sit in a meeting and I would roll out the roadmap, and by the end of the day, I'd have scribbles all over it, right? People wanting to move this here and that here, or didn't understand this. And so I'd have to essentially regenerate it, refix it, and move it on. These days, I don't tend to use the paper roadmap as much. I use an electronic one, but I'm constantly updating the roadmap. In fact, I was just in the roadmap just ahead of this meeting, updating it based on some information I'd just gotten. So these things are dynamic because they should show exactly what is happening. So daily to monthly. Of course, if you're in a more stable market, right, maybe weekly to quarterly. In a more mature product, maybe more in that sort of weekly to quarterly kind of place as well. So it just depends on the kind of product you're doing, right, or how much effort you're spending on a particular product or a particular team. So here's a more in-depth example of the rolling roadmap, which we've looked at before. Now, this has just got 2 lines just for brevity for the particular roadmap. But again, this is a rolling roadmap. You can see we're in the current set of months, and then we've got some quarters, moving down. And as I said, this thing constantly moves to the left as we continue to go across time. The thing about this is that if you look at here, it allows you to do things like start to see prerequisites and dependencies. For example, if you're in the team and you were and the team had to introduce onboarding, what it might be showing here is, let's just say the marketing stream here is that they need to develop some video for the product. But if the onboarding hasn't been done, that may put the video in jeopardy. So what happens? Well, if this team says, well, now this one here that we were going to do now moves to month 3, then the video for the product is now going to push out to quarter 2. But of course, if you start pushing it out to quarter 2, what happens to the rest of it? Well, it starts to push out as well. Now, leaders in your organizations are going to go, no, that's not acceptable. But the reality is that is reality. That is real life. Is that if the onboarding wasn't there, we can't do the next thing, and it has a flow-on impact. And that's why projects often run late, is because things start getting pushed out. So the nice thing about this is exactly like we practice down at our product backlog level, is that when something gets pushed out, we can see what the impact is. So when that happens, the manager has a couple of options. Is there a way that we can try and push the onboarding through? Do we, have we maybe pushed too much stuff onto that team, right? Do we need an extra resource, right? What is it we can do in order to get that stuff done? So it really helps you have a conversation with stakeholders at this higher level before you get down into the nitty-gritty. So that's the idea. It allows you to see this. And so in the month by month, once you get to there, that allows you to do things like prioritize, which then allows you to go and break things down into your product backlog ultimately. So it's at a high enough level that there's just enough information. Now, here's another thing about this roadmap, and if I go back to the blank one, is that these boxes are this size by design, right? Yes, we had to fit a bunch of stuff onto the page, but if you come back and look at this, there is information in here, but there's not a lot of information. So how can you portray that information without writing too much? And that's in quite a small font. You wouldn't want to go much lower than that. So what it also does is enforces a WIP limit. Right? Enforces that work in progress limit that you can't get too much done. So, if you've got bigger teams, of course, you will have different streams and you'll find ways to be able to show that. But the size of the box is also a way of enforcing the WIP limit. All right, let me show you a real life example, right? This is a real life example from an organization that I'm sure many of you know, or at least many of you are aware of the type of product that we're talking about, because you probably use this, every day or every week. So this is a roadmap from 2020 for Netflix. And the reason, I mean, I guess the question I have, and I don't really have a chat window to get you all to talk to me here. So we're at the Q&A window. So, but the question I would normally ask people when I first show them this roadmap is what stands out to them. And the thing that the answer that I get, and the thing that first stood out to me was just how simple it is. So think about Netflix. It's not a small organization. It's got a core product, which is its streaming platform, but this is their 2020 or 2020 to 2021 rolling roadmap for how they were going to update the platform. Now, if you look at this roadmap, it's got four key, they call them strategies, right? They're the strategic areas at that time that Netflix was focusing on. So personalization, content, experience, and interactive storytelling. And so what they have is a very clear plan for what they're going to do quarter by quarter. But the answer everyone comes back is just how simple it is. Because even for all of you who don't work at Netflix, you can read this and understand exactly what's going on. Right? People aren't trying to do 17 things at once. And at Netflix, when they do something in a quarter, the idea is that they actually start it and finish it within a quarter, which is what I was talking about before in breaking down initiatives. Is even though maybe something like this personalization strategy is all of this as part of a bigger personalization, play or even a funded project, is that they're very clear that in quarter two, we will get mood algorithms done. In quarter three, we'll do voice recognition. In quarter four, we'll do language detection. And the idea is that they start and finish it within that quarter. So it's very clear. So, and they're not trying to do anything else. Right? So the key thing is now, of course, what's not on here is things like BAU. What's not on here is things like their purchasing of product, but very clear to see what the direction is for that organization. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is that this is 2020 and it was quarter two 2020. And I probably don't all, still fresh in our mind about what happened in March 2020, which of course was COVID. So the ones in orange are where they were able to pivot. So because COVID happened, in April, they decided we will not work on what we planned to work on. I don't know what that was. Let's just say it was automated lip sync, but we're going to bring forward shared viewing. And because their roadmap was so simple, they were able to make pivoting decisions very easy because they do something inside the quarter and finish it. So they were able to come forward and go, yep, we're going to focus on shared viewing. Everybody be at home. This is now a thing that we want to offer so people can, be with their friends, even if they can't actually be with their friends. And similarly in quarter three was also a pivot, is why it's in orange, is that they decided to put out their custom playback speed. Now, custom playback speed was to do actually with a purchasing decision that they'd made. Netflix bought a bunch of true crime documentaries. And one of the things that they learnt when asking customers about true crime was the people who really are into that content often will listen to podcasts, but when they actually watch the content, they quite often don't watch it. They listen to it. So they'll put Netflix on, the documentary will be playing, but they'll be listening to it as they work around the house or do other things. And because it's like a podcast, it's something where people actually want to speed it up. Because if you ever watched one of those documentaries, they often repeat the same stuff 14 times over as they come back from breaks and all that kind of stuff. So in this particular case, custom playback speed allowed them to have something that would actually bring customers in because it's much like playing a podcast. Doesn't make a lot of sense if you're going to watch an action movie or something like that, particularly if you want to listen to or keep up with the dialogue and the playback. But again, they were able to pivot, which meant that automated lip sync, because of COVID, because of this, then got pushed back to quarter four, which means they could have real conversations with stakeholders to understand what the impacts would be. So the key is, though, that what we're trying to do is build what we call outcome-based roadmaps. So here is our taco stand again, but here it's now written in the rolling roadmap format, but written as objectives. So you can see here, and we saw some of them on that other roadmap I showed you earlier, right? In July, they want to decrease broken taco shells to 5%. That's an objective they're aiming for. Right? They want to introduce super mega sized tacos in August. They want to increase the ease and amount of filling in September. And of course, here's our marketing department, as we saw in that other example, right? Again, they're doing things down here. And if there's an impact up here, it will impact down here and vice versa. So we can see the dependencies. Now, one of the things people, when they often see this, will ask me is, there's a lot of blank blanks in here. Why is that? Well, in this case, this particular team is just one team of people. They can't do a lot of stuff together. So it's very clear right now that there's nothing happening on health conscious options, because in July, we're focusing on this. In August, we're going to flip and work on the tacos, and we'll come back to the filling problem in September. So blank boxes are okay. Right? If you have to put an X through it or something like that, that's also okay. But it's okay to have blank space, right? It just means we're not doing something there. We don't have to fill every hole on the roadmap if you don't need to. Depends on your roadmap. If this was just representing a team or a product team, then yeah, right. If there's nothing in August, then that tells me, okay, we've got to find something for that team. So it just depends on the roadmap that you're building. Now, I did mention story maps before. Story maps, are still useful. They still help us break down work. But essentially, this is, when we're thinking about the customer journey and breaking down the things that are going to be in our backlog. So typically, our roadmap would probably take us in the direction that we have an objective. The objective would then be something that we would write a story map for. Or it could be an initiative that we're doing it for, and our objectives will help us then figure out what the prioritization is. So story maps are still useful down at the lower level. The thing to remember is we're always aiming for continuous prioritization and elaboration. So the thing is that think about your backlog like an iceberg. Right? If there's an iceberg, if you've ever watched Discovery Channel, they tell you that more of the iceberg is below the surface than above the surface. And it's the same thing here, is that whilst we need to know what the entire iceberg looks like, right, we need to know the entire size because we need to fund it. It's a bit like our roadmap. We can put all of our items on our roadmap at a very high level, right? But all of those things are below the surface when we begin because we haven't really started working on them. So as the roadmap starts to move, the things that move into our current, quarter or our current months, well, they're the things that pop above the iceberg, and they're the things we want to spend time breaking down. So that's when we'll then go and break them down on a story map or break them down doing story elaboration. So what you don't want to do is build 10,000 stories for the next 6 months. You want to build just enough stories for the current quarter, because you don't know what's going to happen in the roadmap, whether things will move around. And essentially what's happening is just the things below the surface are juggling around. And like any iceberg, once you finish the things in the current quarter, the top of the iceberg breaks off. What happens to the iceberg? It raises above, and the next part of the top of the iceberg comes up. That's essentially the equivalent of rolling the roadmap to the left. And so how that looks when you put it into a tool is that all the stuff that is higher priority has been broken down. The bigger chunks that we haven't got to can still sit in the back of your backlog, and your roadmap will determine the priority order that they come in, and will tell you when you need to break them down when they move into the current quarter. And so the key of this really is that if you think about the roadmap, is the last thing you want is leaders playing around in the product backlog. If anyone here has been in the role of a scrum master or a project manager and has had a leader come to them and go, why did you take 13 story points this sprint when it should have been 20, right? Or why did this thing happen before this thing? That level of detail down at user story level really is with the team. Right. It should be with the team to then showcase, what they've delivered at the end of the sprint and get feedback then. It's kind of almost too late at that point. But what you do want stakeholders talking about is what are the key outcomes that we're looking for, right? So get them talking about outcomes and outputs, which means get them talking to the roadmap and keep them out of the lower level stuff. That stuff is just for us to manage our workload, for us to be able to find when we're in trouble, for us to come back and have a conversation about the issues that we're having, not for people to come and ask us questions about why we're doing 13 story points versus 20. All right. So what have we learnt here? The thing is that this is essentially a way of us bridging the strategic to tactical. Right? As I said at the start of the class, how do we make sure the team understands what's going on as well as our stakeholders? And so at the strategic level, we have to understand, what the problem is in the first place, right? What is the why? And that's where we use something like a canvas to map our strategy. Once we have our strategy, we then want to work out and go, well, how might we break this down? But we do that in large chunks. In fact, we work on the right-hand side of this roadmap, essentially working in quarters. What might we get done in this quarter or this other quarter? Or what might we get done in this month or this next month if it's a smaller piece of work? Working with the really big items, what are the key outcomes and when we can deliver them, with quarters being your largest thing that you're mapping in. And that is something we can then talk to stakeholders about. When we get closer to the work, when you go through something like quarterly planning or PI planning, you then bring it down and you break it down. So if you're working in this quarterly model, you then go, well, how do I break down this quarter? And so you're breaking down. If you're working in the monthly model, it might be, well, how do I break this down into fortnights? So that's when the team comes along, because now you've got confidence about what it is that you're breaking down. And of course, you start moving to the left. Once you have that, you can then start to break those down into stories and tasks, which is what you then keep in a tool that you might use, or on a wall or whatever it might be, but where your stories are held, because you only want to break down the things that you actually now know that you're working on. And of course, these months here get broken down maybe into 2-week sprints, or if you're doing months, they get broken down into 1-week sprints. Doesn't really matter. It allows you to break it down. So you only get to that lowest level of breakdown once you have those outcomes planned. Those things turn into product and features, which you ultimately then give to your customer. So the key thing with here is this roadmap, because it displays both here and here, allows us to talk to our stakeholders, allows us to talk to our plans, but also with an asterisk on it, also can talk to our customers. Because like the Netflix example, we can show customers what we're planning using the same roadmap if we wish. Now, I put an asterisk here. You may want to amend that for public consumption. There may be more detail in your roadmap that you don't want to tell. But if you're in a product business or a business where your stakeholders, your customers really care about what it is you're building, think organizations like Microsoft or Apple, who have very open roadmaps as to where their products are going. You can also use the same thing to get there. So it really is that missing link. So what will our takeaways? You have to start with a vision. The vision is super important because it's going to predict what you actually put onto that roadmap. It's our way of communicating the gap between the strategy and the tactical, or from our stakeholders down to the people actually doing the work. It has to be simple. Right? Too many roadmaps I see are too overcomplicated. Make sure they're focused on objectives, not on tasks. The tasks come at the lower level. So what are the objectives that we're trying to handle? Right? You've all heard, people talk about we've got to move from outputs to outcomes. That's exactly it. It's outcome driven. Establish your value streams and themes so you can see dependencies. So you have to put a little bit of thought as to how you might break it up, and you might need to play with that a little bit. And this is all about what agility is really at its core, is you have to break things down iteratively. Break it down again. And so this allows you to do this at the highest level from the portfolio down to the next level. So when it finally does come to you, it's already something broken down at least into something like months, which makes it a lot easier to break down rather than trying to break something really huge. If you want further reading, these are some books that I've found useful and map some of the things that we've talked about in the class. I mentioned Roman Pitcher's Strategize, great book that goes into more detail. If you're interested in the project to product, Mick Kirsten's book is good, as well as Shane Hasty and Evan Layburn's #NoProjects. If you want to see some different examples of product roadmaps, Product Roadmaps Relaunched is a fantastic book. I will put a little asterisk on that one, though. You probably want to buy the paper copy, not the electronic copy. They somehow mangled the electronic copy. There's lots of pictures, and they're very hard to read in the electronic copy. So there's one I will say go buy it. And if you want to know just more about breaking stuff down and products in general, then Jeff Patton's User Story Mapping is an excellent book as well. Thank you, folks. That's roadmaps. They are the missing link. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Craig. It was an interesting look at it. So does anyone have any questions? We have the Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to throw out your thoughts there.
Or go have a weekend, either or. Enough learning for a week.
TGIF, right?
Exactly.
There we go.
Ashwini. Yes, Ashwini. Yeah, we'll share the slides. Absolutely, we'll get them available.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Pete there. The rolling concept is brilliant, isn't it? I guess that's one of the bits of the power of it, the planning horizon that becomes more and more into focus as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think Pete, that's if you're using the static template like we had before, and the other thing, by the way, we'll also make available to you is the template. If you want to go use the template that I showed, we'll also make that available to you as well. I mean, it's pretty easy to draw. It's just boxes on a page, but that might help you get started. But yeah, when things roll to the left, and because they are disappearing, you have to do something with them. So if something's happened, like you've discovered something, you have to come up with a new outcome, right? This outcome, if we've done some of it, it forces you to come up with what's the new outcome and then how you balance it with other outcomes. So the rolling roadmap means that you just don't live with stuff hanging there forever because it's going to roll off the side because the time has rolled by. So it forces you to do something with it.
Here's an interesting
Uh,
question from Anita. Do you show
yeah.
dependencies on these roadmaps?
So it's up to you, Anita. What I find is I've worked with people who do scaled agile safe, for example, and one of their concepts is that when they do things like PI planning, they literally put pieces of string between between items. It comes very messy very fast. And so I have seen people try to do it with even the example I've showed before by drawing lines, but you end up with lines all over the place. I think one of the things is that when you start talking about things in outcomes as opposed to outputs or tasks, your dependencies actually start to, I'm not going to say disappear, but they reduce because what you will see is things like like I showed you the example, the marketing team does need this thing before they can start. But when you're talking about outcomes, it might be, well, do we need that thing? Is there a way we can work around it? And so what tends to happen is that you end up having a conversation about what it is that we need to do to solve this, rather than the clear dependencies. But it does depend on the type of roadmap you do. I did talk about the fact you can have themes and streams safe, or different types of say resources or people might be working on something. So there might be a dependency saying we're waiting on the vendor for this before we do this, and you really want to show that. So the answer is yes, you can. I would say though, if you've got lots of lines over your roadmap though, like all over the place, it's probably showing that you're not quite as outcome driven as you would like it to be, as you'd like it to be. So the idea is to be able to definitely talk about dependencies. Up to you if you need to actually describe them. I usually use the we need to move something as the talk about, well, what will now be what will be the impact of doing that. Or when you put something in a box in the first place, this is in this box because it's dependent on the things that came before it. See Matt. Hey Matt, I know Matt, so good to see you, Matt. How many roadmaps is enough roadmaps for large IT departments? Really great question. My first answer is it depends, but which is kind of a cop out coach answer. The real answer to that is that there's actually not a right or wrong. In an organization, Matt's in the university business. In an organization like that, even if you're in a particular department of say of an organization, it might come down to at what are you trying to track on your roadmap, I guess? Are you trying to talk to a set of teams? Is it for a particular product? So the way you set up might be like that. So if you have, say, 6, independent, teams, or if you're doing safe release trains or value streams, then it's not uncommon to have 6 different roadmaps that are describing what happens there. It's also okay if you have, a higher level overarching roadmap. Tooling can help you with that. That will then show you here's all the different streams that the teams are working on and their high level outcomes. And then you go down to a low level, which means you can also then start to show things like here's also some BAU work that's going on and here's other stuff going on. So yeah, I mean, hundreds is probably too many. Unlikely you'll just have one. But I know even in our organization, we have one roadmap, but it has it has quite a number of different streams in it. In the tool, it probably has about 5 or 6 streams. We're not a large organization, but even though we need that, so it just depends. Hope that answers your question, Matt.
Pete has another question. Is it also a tracking mechanism?
Not sure what you mean by tracking there, Pete. As in a way of showing that things are done, maybe. If you mean by that, one of the things that if you're using a tool, when it rolls off to the left, I have used things like status, right, or change the color of it, a bit like you saw on that Netflix roadmap, to show that things are done. And even if actually, now think about it, even when it's in the current month, I will change the status to show things as done. Right, so turn them to green, or if it's in a tool, change the status. So yes, it can be a tracking mechanism, although that's its kind of its secondary nature. But yeah, if that helps, with telling the story. Because again, if you're in a current, say, a current month or a current quarter, being able to see things actually done, because remember that's in the manifesto, right? Essentially working solutions, essentially are either done or not done. Then marking done can also help build confidence with your stakeholders as well. Last thing you want is all the things to go done on the last day of the sprint. It's the same problem. Sorry, on the last day of the quarter even. That's what we're trying to avoid. So hopefully I answered that for you, Pete. Anonymous thing's just making a comment there. It's helpful to spend time to create an overarching strategy through to inform the strategic roadmap to tactical delivery. Yes, that's the point. And I think the thing I'll say about that, Anonymous, is that I think we sometimes get in our head that to get a overarching strategy, takes a lot of time. Even our courses, when we talk about things like the Lean Initiative Canvas, that's the kind of thing that you want to, it's not days to weeks, right? It should be something that's maybe hours to days, right? As at least as an initial cut, because like everything in agility, it will change. So, if it's something you're just sitting there and going, hey, I need to spend 10 weeks getting this thing together, you're probably thinking about it the wrong way. Of course, as you start to get into the detail, that will break down, but that's what the roadmap is for. The roadmap will then help you start to break that down. So even if you're building a business case, map it on a roadmap, right? Map it in a backlog, right? Practice what we preach. It's not just for delivering software, it's for all the things. And then, when you get down to building your first part of the roadmap, again, don't over-engineer it. If your roadmap has 3 things on it right now, because that's all you know, then show it to your stakeholders and go, I only know about 3 things. What do you want to do? On the same token, if it's got 10,000 things on it, then use visualization to do that, to go, there is too much stuff in the current thing. It doesn't all fit. How are we going to move it? So it allows you to have those conversations even when you're starting. So don't worry about having too little or too much detail. Just get something down on a page, right? Even if it's like, here's the things we're going to do, and here's all the things that don't fit. What are we going to do with it? Can be a very useful conversation. And Name asks the question, thank you, Anonymous. Name asked the question, the rolling roadmap is great. Could you set up a similar roadmap in a Confluence page and make it dynamic? I have to think about how to do it dynamically on Confluence, but the answer is yes. When you think about a roadmap that's rolling from side to side, okay, that works on backwards, is that as things roll off to the end of the roadmap, they're essentially just disappearing off to the it's actually that way. They're disappearing. So one of the things you can do is you can set a line on the roadmap and just keep moving a table, like in something like Confluence, a table that just keeps moving to the left. So you can still see all your history, but you can frame people to look at what's on the current roadmap, what's already been delivered. So even if you think about on a wall, like if you look at the wall behind me, if that sort of post that's sort of just over my shoulder there was the line, as this roadmap moves along the way, right? It's just that we're moving that. It's like we could move that post to the right hand side, so the line keeps moving to the right to pick up the next month or the next quarter. Thank you, Name.
See, Ashwini has a hand raised. Can you put a question in the Q&A panel, Ashwini?
Yeah, or we could actually allow to talk, I think, is something we can do as well. But Barry, I suppose the leveling is somewhat complicated. Some stakeholders want to be aware of the business only initiatives that are happening while the development initiatives are being achieved. Well, see, that's Barry, I guess that's the point of the roadmap is, like you saw, for example, I had a development team in marketing. So one of the things is that you actually want to be able to show those, because typically those business initiatives are somewhat tied to the other things that are happening inside the organization and will have their own dependencies. So, and again, that comes to the fact that, our traditional organizations are set up where we have the business and IT, whereas, the product concept is actually having a team of people who work together, which is not those, which actually gets there. So yeah, while you're still in maybe a traditional organizational sense, it can be more difficult, but I think it's a conversation that you need to have, and the roadmap can be the conversation to sit down with those business initiatives and understand exactly where they're at. And sometimes what will happen is I'll put the business initiatives on my own roadmap just at a high level about the ones that are really impacting us. And as I get updates on them, it means I can then have those conversations to go, here's what's going on. Lean portfolio management is a process that might help you with that as well, Barry. That's a conversation for another day.
Well, it looks like we are out of questions there, and it is just about 4 o'clock.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, just Anita said, Giphy has a rudimentary roadmap. I'm surprised nobody asked about tools, but the tools are all reasonably rudimentary. You have to often do a lot of work to make them work for you. So whilst you can, I know here at SoftEd we use Monday.com. I have to hack it to make it do what I want it to do, but I can show a roadmap in there. Same with Jira. Even though there are product plugins, I've found them all. They all have pros and cons. So that's why I've given you the template. My suggestion is start with a piece of paper and just write stuff down, or start with something simple like whiteboard or Miro or Mural or one of those tools and just shove post-it notes everywhere. And then as you start to then keep it updated, then figure out how you can sort of map whatever tool you're using to actually be able to show it. But start simple is biggest thing. We spend too much time trying to figure out how the tools are going to work. Think about the problem you're trying to solve, which is how do you communicate? So yeah, and Paul said Excel. Excel's got its own problems as well, but yes, Excel can be a simple place to start because it is just boxes and lines.
Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us to the hour. So thank you very much, Craig. Thank you for everyone for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on another webinar.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.